We're almost there.
Just a little further.
Keep your strength up. You're doing well.
I don't know if I can move anymore.
Don't give up on us now. Look, we're right there.
Help yourselves to tea, gentlemen. More coming. Thank you, Maya. This is a lifesaver. You'll be all right, Ethan. Just take the medicine. I'm sorry, Maya.
The staff stays until I say otherwise. Ethan Whitmore's voice cut through the roaring wind like a blade, cold and absolute, as the final helicopter lifted off from the snow-covered landing pad above the mountain estate. The sound of the rotors faded into the white storm swallowing the Colorado sky, leaving behind only silence, ice, and the terrible realization that nobody else was coming. Maya Brooks stood near the service entrance with a wool coat folded tightly across her arms, snowflakes melting against her dark curls as the temperature dropped another 5 degrees in less than an hour. Around her, the remaining staff exchanged nervous looks. One of the cooks quietly crossed himself. Another worker stared toward the winding mountain road already buried beneath nearly 3 feet of snow. But Ethan Whitmore didn't seem concerned. Standing beneath the pale floodlights of his massive glass mansion, the billionaire looked untouched by the storm raging around him. His charcoal overcoat hung perfectly over broad shoulders, and the warm amber glow from the house behind him made him appear almost carved from stone. "Mr. Whitmore," the house manager said carefully, rubbing his gloved hands together. "The county emergency office said the roads could stay closed for 48 hours. Ethan barely looked at him. "Then I suggest everyone focus on doing their jobs instead of panicking." His sharp gray eyes shifted briefly toward Maya, lingering for half a second longer than necessary before moving away again. Not because he recognized her. He didn't. Maya had worked in the Whitmore estate for 8 months, and Ethan still referred to her as the maid. Never Maya. Never Miss Brooks. Just another invisible worker moving quietly through marble hallways carrying trays and cleaning fireplaces while wealthy guests laughed beneath crystal chandeliers. The wind slammed violently against the side of the mansion. Somewhere deep in the mountains, thunder rolled beneath the storm like distant artillery. Maya tightened her grip on the folded blankets she'd been carrying to the staff quarters. "You should save those for the upstairs guests," Ethan said suddenly without emotion. Maya looked up carefully. "Sir." "The blankets," he replied. "The investors in the East Wing paid to be comfortable. The staff can manage downstairs." The words settled heavily in the frozen air. Maya noticed one of the younger housekeepers lower her eyes immediately. Another worker quietly turned away. Nobody challenged him. Nobody ever did. Maya swallowed slowly, her breath visible in the bitter cold. "One of the kitchen staff is already shivering pretty badly," she said softly. "I just thought, that's the problem." Ethan stepped closer, snow crunching beneath polished leather boots. "People like you always think feelings solve everything." His voice stayed calm, but somehow that made it worse. "Kindness doesn't keep the lights on, miss." He paused, realizing he didn't know her last name. Maya held his gaze anyway. "Brooks," she answered quietly. Ethan gave a distracted nod, already turning away. "Right. Well, Brooks, in this house, people are paid to work, not to play hero." The massive front doors shut behind him with a heavy thud, sealing warmth inside, while the storm continued to howl across the mountain. Maya remained standing in the snow for several seconds, her fingers tightening around the blankets as icy wind whipped against her face. Then somewhere behind the estate, the power flickered once, twice, and suddenly, the entire mansion went dark. Darkness swallowed the Whitmore estate so completely that for one long second nobody moved. The chandeliers vanished. The warm glow from the marble hallways disappeared. Even the soft hum of the heating system died beneath the storm outside. Then came the sound that changed everything. Wind, violent and endless, rattling the giant glass windows like invisible fists. Somewhere upstairs, a woman gasped. Another employee cursed under his breath. Maya immediately stepped forward, balancing the stack of blankets against her chest, while emergency lights flickered dim red along the baseboards. The enormous mansion suddenly looked less like a luxury estate and more like a stranded ship trapped in ice. Backup generators should have kicked in already. The house manager muttered nervously, pulling out his phone only to stare at the dead signal bars. Snow hammered against the windows in thick, white waves, nearly impossible to see through now. Maya glanced toward the front entrance where cold air slipped beneath the doors in thin, ghost-like streams. The temperature inside was already dropping. "Everybody head to the West Lounge," she said calmly. "It is the smallest room with a fireplace. We can keep the heat contained there." Several workers immediately nodded. Her voice carried a steadiness the others needed. But before anyone could move, Ethan Whitmore appeared again at the top of the staircase, one hand gripping the polished railing as the dim emergency lights cast sharp shadows across his face. He looked irritated more than worried. "Nobody leaves their assigned area," he ordered. "The generators will restart." "Sir," the manager replied carefully, "the storm may have damaged the external lines." Ethan descended the stairs slowly. This house was built to survive blizzards. Another violent gust slammed into the estate hard enough to shake the windows. Somewhere in the distance, glass shattered. Everyone flinched except Ethan. Maya noticed the youngest maid, barely 19, trembling beside the dining room entrance while rubbing her freezing hands together. Without hesitation, Maya unfolded one of the blankets and wrapped it gently around the girl's shoulders. "Thank you," the girl whispered shakily. Ethan saw it immediately. His jaw tightened. "I thought we discussed this." Maya lifted her eyes carefully. "She is cold, and sentiment will not fix the generators." His voice remained smooth, almost quiet, but every word carried weight. "You are staff, Miss Brooks. Your responsibility is discipline, not emotional decisions." Maya said nothing. She only continued adjusting the blanket around the frightened girl. For a brief moment, something unreadable crossed Ethan's face. Not anger exactly. Something closer to discomfort, as if kindness itself irritated him. Then suddenly every emergency light blinked out too. Complete darkness crashed over the mansion again, followed by a frightened murmur from somewhere near the kitchen hallway. The storm outside sounded louder now. Almost alive. Maya heard someone breathing unevenly nearby. "Everybody stay calm," she said softly into the darkness. Nobody moved too fast. A phone flashlight switched on near the staircase, casting pale light upward across Ethan's face. The billionaire stood perfectly still while snow shadows moved behind him through the towering windows. Then his phone vibrated sharply in his hand. He answered immediately. "What?" Silence. Maya watched his expression slowly change for the first time that night. Not fear. Worse. Realization. "The roads are gone?" he asked quietly. Another pause. The color drained slightly from his face. "How long until emergency crews reach us?" More silence. Then Ethan lowered the phone slowly. The signal disappeared before he spoke again. When he finally looked up at the trapped staff standing around him in darkness and cold, the storm outside no longer seemed like something happening beyond the walls. It had entered the house with them. The West Lounge became the only warm place left in the mansion by midnight. A fire crackled weakly inside the enormous stone fireplace, while nearly a dozen staff members crowded together beneath blankets and winter coats pulled from storage closets. The room smelled faintly of smoke, wet wool, and melting snow. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the blizzard buried the estate inch by inch beneath swirling white darkness. Wind screamed across the mountain ridges hard enough to shake the glass. Maya moved quietly between people carrying mugs of hot water heated over a small gas burner salvaged from the kitchen. Her movements stayed calm, measured, almost gentle, despite the tension pressing down on everyone inside the room. She handed a cup to the older groundskeeper whose breathing had turned raspy from the cold. Then she checked on the young maid sleeping against the couch cushions beneath 3 blankets. Nobody asked her to do these things. She simply did them. Across the room, Ethan Whitmore sat alone near the far end of the fireplace in a leather armchair, one ankle resting over his knee while shadows from the fire moved across his sharp features. Even stranded in a powerless mansion during a blizzard, he somehow still carried the posture of a man in control. A crystal tumbler rested untouched beside him. He had not spoken in nearly 20 minutes. But Maya noticed something others did not. He kept glancing toward the dark hallway leading deeper into the estate. Not nervous exactly. Listening. Waiting. Generators are not coming back tonight, the house manager finally admitted in a low voice while checking his dead radio again. The maintenance team downtown said the transformer station collapsed under ice. A heavy silence followed. One of the cooks rubbed his face tiredly. So what happens now? Nobody answered immediately. Snow lashed violently against the windows again. Then came another sound beneath the storm. A metallic groan somewhere deep inside the mansion. Several people looked up instantly. Pipes, Maya whispered. The temperature is dropping too fast. Ethan finally spoke from the shadows near the fire. The lower east wing has emergency insulation. His tone remained cold and controlled. Move everyone there in shifts. The house manager hesitated. Sir, that wing was sealed after the storm damage last winter. Then unseal it. Maya looked toward Ethan carefully. The east wing windows are exposed directly to the mountainside. If the glass freezes through, people could get trapped there. Ethan lifted his eyes toward her slowly. Firelight reflected against the steel gray of his gaze. Do you always challenge instructions you are paid to follow? The room immediately went quiet again. Maya stood still for a moment, holding a folded blanket against her chest. No, sir, she answered softly. Only the dangerous ones. Several workers exchanged nervous glances. Nobody spoke. Ethan leaned back deeper into the leather chair, studying her now with visible irritation. Interesting, he said quietly. You think surviving a snowstorm suddenly makes everyone equal. Maya did not respond right away. The fire popped sharply between them. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains like something alive. No, she said at last. I think cold treats everybody the same. Something shifted in Ethan's expression then. Briefly, so brief most people would have missed it. But Maya saw it. Not anger. Recognition. As if her words had touched something he spent years trying not to feel. Before he could answer, the lights overhead suddenly flickered once. Then a deafening crash echoed somewhere upstairs. Glass shattered violently. The young maid screamed. Everyone jumped to their feet at once. Maya reacted first, already moving toward the hallway before the sound had fully faded. But Ethan stood abruptly and blocked her path. Nobody goes upstairs. His voice was sharper now, more human, more afraid. Another loud crash thundered above them. Then came the sound that froze every person in the room. Footsteps. Slow, uneven, crossing the second floor while the rest of the mansion sat buried in darkness. The footsteps above them stopped suddenly. Every person in the lounge froze beside the dying fire, listening to the storm pound against the mansion while silence stretched across the second floor like a held breath. Maya could hear the soft crackling of wood in the fireplace and the uneven breathing of the young maid beside her. Then another sound came from upstairs. A weak cry for help. Human. Frightened. Somebody is up there, one of the cooks whispered. Ethan Whitmore immediately stepped in front of the hallway entrance again, his expression tightening beneath the shifting firelight. Nobody moves. Maya stared at him in disbelief. Someone could be hurt, and someone else could freeze trying to play rescuer in a collapsing house. His voice carried more force now, sharper around the edges. The calm billionaire mask was beginning to crack. Another cry echoed faintly from above them, this time weaker. Maya did not wait. She shoved a flashlight into her coat pocket and moved past Ethan before he could stop her. Miss Brooks. His voice snapped through the room. She paused only long enough to glance back. If the pipes burst upstairs, hypothermia will hit fast, she said quietly. Waiting could kill somebody. Then she disappeared into the dark hallway before anyone answered. The second floor felt 20 degrees colder than downstairs. Wind hissed through broken glass somewhere nearby while snow drifted across. The marble floor in thin white trails. Maya moved carefully through the darkness, using the flashlight sparingly to conserve battery. Family portraits lined the walls, their gold frames glowing faintly whenever the beam crossed them. Ethan's mansion no longer looked elegant up here. It looked abandoned, hollow. The storm had stripped away its luxury and left behind only silence and stone. Another weak sound came from farther down the hallway. Maya followed it toward the east wing, where freezing air spilled through shattered windows. She rounded the corner and stopped immediately. Mr. Keller, the elderly groundskeeper, lay slumped beside an overturned cabinet, clutching his ankle tightly while snow blew through a broken window nearby. His face had turned pale beneath the cold. Easy, Maya whispered, kneeling beside him. Can you stand? I slipped, he muttered through clenched teeth. tried to close the shutters before the glass gave out. Maya quickly wrapped one arm beneath his shoulder while pulling a nearby curtain loose with the other hand. She shoved the heavy fabric against the broken window to slow the wind. It barely helped. Ice covered the hardwood floor beneath them already. "We need to move now," she said. Mr. Keller tried standing, but winced immediately. Maya tightened her grip and steadied him. Together, they moved slowly down the hallway while the mansion groaned around them beneath the weight of snow and freezing wind. Halfway back toward the staircase, the lights flickered once unexpectedly, then died again. But in that single flash of pale emergency power, Maya saw something that stopped her cold. Ethan Whitmore standing at the top of the stairs watching her. Snow shadows moved behind him through the giant windows. He had followed her upstairs after all. Their eyes locked across the dark hallway. For the first time since she arrived at the estate months ago, Ethan did not look annoyed or superior. He looked shaken. His gaze dropped toward Mr. Keller leaning heavily against her shoulder, then toward the curtain wrapped around Maya's frozen hands to protect them from the shattered glass. "You went up here alone," he said quietly. Maya adjusted her grip on the older man. Somebody had to. Ethan stared at her for a long second while wind roared through the broken east wing behind them. Then suddenly another deep cracking sound thundered through the mansion. The entire hallway trembled beneath their feet. Snow burst inward from somewhere above. And this time, even Ethan Whitmore looked afraid. The sound above them grew louder. Deep. Heavy. Like the mountain itself was shifting over the roof. Snow dust drifted from the ceiling while the east wing groaned beneath the pressure of ice and freezing wind. Maya tightened her arm around Mr. Keller and forced herself to keep moving toward the staircase. Ethan stepped forward immediately, taking the older groundskeeper's other side without a word. For several seconds, neither he nor Maya spoke as they guided the trembling man down the dark hallway together. The silence between them felt strange now, different from before. Not softer exactly, just stripped bare by fear and exhaustion. Another violent gust slammed into the mansion hard enough to shake the walls again. Somewhere downstairs, somebody screamed. "Move faster," Ethan said sharply. Maya glanced toward him. His expensive coat was dusted with snow now. His hair no longer perfectly neat. For the first time, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man trapped in a storm with everyone else. They reached the staircase just as another section of glass shattered somewhere behind them. Wind exploded through the east wing instantly, carrying snow into the hallway in freezing white waves. Maya pulled Mr. Keller closer to shield him from the cold, while Ethan pushed open the stairwell door below. Warm firelight flickered faintly from the west lounge downstairs. The moment they entered, the remaining staff rushed toward them in panic. What happened? Was the roof hit? Is anybody hurt? Voices overlapped beneath the storm outside. Maya carefully lowered Mr. Keller onto the couch beside the fireplace, while the house manager wrapped blankets around his shoulders. The older man's hands shook violently from cold exposure. Maya immediately knelt beside him to check his breathing. "He needs warm fluids." "Slowly," she said calmly. "Not too fast." Ethan stood nearby watching her. Firelight reflected across his face while snow melted from the shoulders of his coat onto the hardwood floor beneath him. One of the younger workers suddenly looked toward the hallway. "Where is Daniel?" The room went still. Maya lifted her head immediately. Daniel, the maintenance worker. Nobody had seen him since the blackout started. The house manager cursed under his breath and grabbed his flashlight. He said he was checking the backup fuel tanks an hour ago. Ethan's jaw tightened instantly. "Those tanks are near the lower garage entrance." Maya understood immediately. The garage exit connected directly to the outside service road. If Daniel had tried reaching the fuel shed during the worst part of the storm, visibility would have dropped to nearly zero. "He could freeze out there," Maya whispered. Nobody moved. Nobody volunteered. The storm outside sounded impossible now. Wind screamed across the mountain like tearing metal, while snow battered the windows hard enough to rattle the entire lounge. Then Ethan spoke quietly. "Nobody is going outside tonight." Several workers looked relieved hearing it. Maya did not. If he is trapped near the fuel shed, he may not survive until morning. Ethan looked at her sharply. "And sending someone else into a whiteout solves what exactly?" "Leaving him there does not solve anything either." The tension inside the room tightened instantly. Maya slowly stood from beside Mr. Keller, pulling her coat tighter around herself. "I know the service path," she said. I passed it bringing deliveries up the mountain last month. Ethan stared at her as if trying to decide whether she was brave or reckless. Maybe both. Absolutely not. His voice carried authority again now, colder than before. The storm already took the roads. Nobody leaves this house. Maya held his gaze steadily. You told me earlier people are paid to work here. Daniel worked for you too. Those words landed harder than shouting would have. Ethan's expression darkened immediately. The room fell silent except for the fire and the storm outside. Then Maya reached for the flashlight hanging beside the fireplace. Miss Brooks. Ethan's voice stopped her halfway to the hallway. She turned slowly. For one long second, he looked like he wanted to say something else. Something human. But whatever it was disappeared behind the walls he carried around himself. If you walk out that door, he said quietly, do not expect anyone to come after you. Maya looked at him for a moment beneath the flickering firelight. Then she pulled on her gloves, opened the heavy service door, and stepped alone into the blizzard. The storm swallowed Maya almost instantly. The moment the heavy service door slammed shut behind her, the wind hit with enough force to steal her breath. Snow lashed across the mountain in blinding waves, stinging her face and freezing against her eyelashes within seconds. The flashlight beam barely cut 3 feet ahead before disappearing into white darkness. Maya lowered her head and pushed forward anyway. Every step sank deep into fresh snow piling across the narrow service trail beside the mansion. Somewhere far behind her, the warm glow from the west lounge windows faded until the estate itself looked like a ghost buried in ice. The mountain had become silent in the strangest way. Not quiet. Never quiet. The wind still screamed endlessly through the trees and over the cliffs, but beyond that there was nothing human left. No roads. No cars. No city lights. Just cold. Endless cold. Maya wrapped one arm tighter around herself while gripping the flashlight with the other hand. Her gloves were already soaked through. She focused on the small landmarks she remembered from previous supply deliveries. A bent pine tree near the lower ridge. A narrow stone wall half buried beneath snow. The rusted service gate leading toward the fuel shed below the garage access road. Then suddenly her flashlight caught movement ahead. A shape half collapsed beside the fence line. Daniel! She shouted immediately, struggling through the snow toward him. The maintenance worker lifted his head weakly at the sound of her voice. Snow covered his coat and shoulders almost completely. One leg was twisted awkwardly beneath him near the frozen embankment. I slipped, he breathed shakily. Could not find the trail back. Maya dropped beside him instantly. His skin looked pale beneath the ice clinging to his beard. Can you stand? Daniel tried, but winced immediately. Ankle. Maya looked back, toward the mansion barely visible through the storm above them. The climb back would be brutal, even alone. Carrying someone injured through nearly 4 feet of snow felt almost impossible. But she did not hesitate. Put your arm around me, she said softly. We are getting you home. The word home surprised even her. Because somehow during the storm, the cold mansion above them had stopped feeling like Ethan Whitmore's estate and started feeling like the only fragile shelter left in a frozen world. They moved slowly uphill together, stumbling through wind so fierce it nearly pushed them backward. Maya could barely feel her hands anymore. Her knees shook from exhaustion beneath the layers of snow soaking into her clothes. More than once Daniel nearly collapsed completely. Each time she tightened her grip and kept pulling him forward. Then through the storm she saw something unexpected. Another flashlight beam cutting through the snow ahead. Maya stopped immediately. A tall figure emerged from the white darkness moving toward them against the wind. Ethan Whitmore. Snow covered his dark coat and hair, while his expensive leather gloves were dusted white with ice. He carried a heavy emergency blanket over one shoulder and another flashlight in his hand. For several seconds none of them spoke. The storm roared around them while Ethan stared at Maya, supporting Daniel's weight almost entirely by herself. His expression changed when he saw how badly her hands were shaking from the cold. You came, Daniel whispered weakly. Ethan ignored the comment. His eyes stayed on Maya. You were gone too long. The words came out quieter than she expected. Not angry. Not cold. Worried. Maya looked at him carefully beneath the swirling snow. He would not have survived the night out here. Ethan glanced toward Daniel's injured ankle, then slowly removed the thick emergency blanket from his shoulder and wrapped it around Maya instead. The warmth shocked her. Instantly. Sir, You need this more than I do. No, Ethan replied softly, his voice nearly lost beneath the storm. Right now, I really do not. Then, without another word, he stepped beside Daniel, lifted the older man's arm over his own shoulder, and together they began the long walk back through the blizzard toward the faint light of the mansion waiting above them. By the time they reached the mansion again, Maya could barely feel her legs. Snow clung heavily to her coat and curls while icy water soaked through her boots with every exhausted step. The service doors opened immediately as the remaining staff rushed forward to help Daniel inside. Warm air spilled weakly from the west lounge, carrying the scent of smoke and melted candle wax into the freezing hallway. Maya leaned one hand against the wall for balance as the doors shut behind them. Her entire body trembled uncontrollably now. Ethan noticed immediately. "Get more blankets," he ordered sharply before anyone else could react. The room moved fast after that. The young maid Maya had protected earlier hurried over with dry towels while the house manager helped Daniel onto the couch beside the fire. Voices filled the lounge again, but softer now. Different. Fear still hung in the room, yet something else had entered with them from the storm outside. Respect. Maya lowered herself slowly into a chair near the fireplace, while someone wrapped blankets around her shoulders. The heat burned against her frozen skin almost painfully. Across the room, Ethan stood silently near the windows watching snow bury the mountain beyond the glass. He had not removed his coat, had not poured himself another drink, had not retreated into the distance the way he usually did. Instead, he kept glancing toward Maya when he thought nobody noticed. The storm raged on through the night. Pipes groaned inside the walls. Ice spread across the corners of the windows despite the fire struggling to survive in the massive stone fireplace. One by one, the exhausted staff eventually drifted into uneasy sleep beneath blankets scattered across couches and rugs. Only the fire remained awake, throwing soft gold light across tired faces and flickering shadows. Sometime after 3 in the morning, Maya stirred suddenly from the chair. A harsh cough echoed from the far side of the lounge. She looked up immediately. Ethan Whitmore sat alone near the dark windows, one hand pressed against his forehead, while his breathing sounded rough and uneven. Maya pushed the blankets aside and walked toward him quietly despite her own exhaustion. "You should be resting," she said softly. Ethan gave a faint, humorless laugh without looking at her. "That advice sounds familiar." Maya stepped closer and noticed the faint redness across his cheeks. Sweat glistened lightly at his temples despite the freezing room. "You have a fever." "I am fine." Another cough interrupted him before the sentence fully landed. Maya knelt beside the leather chair and gently placed the back of her hand against his forehead. Ethan froze instantly beneath her touch. Not because it hurt, because it had been a very long time since someone touched him with care instead of obligation. "You are burning up," she whispered. The cold finally got through that expensive coat. Ethan looked down at her hand, still resting lightly against his forehead. The fire reflected softly in Maya's dark eyes while snow drifted endlessly beyond the glass behind him. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly. The question sounded honest, almost childlike beneath the exhaustion. Maya blinked once, surprised by it. "Because you are sick. After everything I said to you?" She held his gaze steadily. Cold does not care who deserves kindness. Silence settled between them while the fire crackled softly nearby. Ethan looked away first. His shoulders sagged slightly beneath the weight of exhaustion and something deeper. Regret, maybe. Shame. Maya stood and moved toward the fireplace, returning moments later with the last packet of fever medicine from the emergency kit and a cup of warm water. "This is all we have left," she said gently. Ethan stared at the medicine in her hand. "You should save it for yourself." Maya shook her head once. "You need it more." He took the cup slowly, his fingers brushing hers for half a second. Cold, unsteady, human. Then Ethan looked around. The lounge at the sleeping workers stretched across couches and blankets near the dying fire. "Where is everybody else?" he asked quietly. Maya hesitated before answering. "Most of the staff left an hour ago." Ethan frowned immediately. "Left?" One of the supply drivers found a snowcat trail open near the south ridge. She lowered her voice softly. They were afraid the mansion would not hold until morning. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "And you stayed?" Maya looked toward the storm beyond the windows. Then back at him. "Someone had to. For the first time in years, Ethan Whitmore felt something inside him crack wider than pride. Morning never fully arrived. The storm clouds hanging over the mountains turned the windows pale gray instead of black, but the blizzard still buried the Whitmore estate beneath layers of ice and snow. The fire in the West Lounge had burned down to glowing embers by dawn, leaving the room cold enough for people's breath to drift visibly through the air again. Maya sat curled beneath a blanket near the fireplace, her eyes heavy from exhaustion. She had not truly slept. Every time the wind slammed against the mansion, somebody woke in panic. Every time the pipes groaned inside the walls, another person whispered that the roof might collapse next. Across the room, Ethan Whitmore remained in the leather chair near the windows. His fever had worsened during the night. Sweat dampened the collar of his shirt despite the freezing temperature, while exhaustion hollowed the sharpness from his face. Maya noticed his hands trembling slightly when he reached for the cup of water beside him. "You need to rest properly," she said softly. Ethan managed a faint, tired smile that barely lasted a second. "You keep saying that like I know how." Maya looked at him carefully. The arrogance that once filled every room around him seemed smaller now. Fragile somehow, like the storm had stripped away all the polished layers he normally hid behind. A long silence settled between them while snow drifted endlessly beyond the windows. Then Ethan spoke again, quieter this time. "After my wife died, people stopped speaking to me honestly." Maya remained still. Beside the fire, Ethan stared toward the storm outside instead of at her. Lawyers wanted signatures. Investors wanted reassurance. Employees wanted stability. His jaw tightened faintly. "Everybody needed something from me." He swallowed hard before continuing. "And eventually I convinced myself kindness was just another transaction." The fire cracked softly between them. Maya listened without interrupting. Ethan rubbed tiredly at his forehead. "Do you know the strange thing?" He let out a weak breath that almost sounded like laughter. "The more successful I became, the emptier the house felt." His eyes drifted slowly across the massive lounge around them. The marble floors, the towering windows, the expensive furniture buried beneath blankets and emergency candles now. "I built this place to feel untouchable," he admitted quietly. "But all it did was make everybody feel unwelcome." Maya lowered her gaze toward the fading embers in the fireplace. "People leave places that feel cold," she said softly. Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her. Not as staff, not as background. As a person sitting only a few feet away, carrying exhaustion in her eyes and kindness in her hands despite everything he had said to her before the storm. "Why did you stay?" he asked again. Honestly, Maya hesitated for the first time since the blizzard began. Outside, wind swept thick snow across the glass in slow white spirals. "Because I know what it feels like when nobody comes back for you." Ethan's expression shifted immediately. Maya pulled the blanket tighter around herself before continuing quietly. "When I was 12, my mother worked double shifts at a nursing home during a winter storm in Chicago." Her voice stayed calm, but softer now. "The buses stopped running. Roads closed. She walked nearly 6 miles home through the snow because she thought I would be scared alone." Ethan said nothing. "She got pneumonia after that." Maya looked toward the dying fire. "But she kept saying the same thing over and over while she recovered." Ethan leaned forward slightly despite the fever pulling at him. "What did she say?" Maya finally looked back at him. "You do not abandon people. Just because it is hard to stay." Silence filled the lounge after that. Deep, heavy, honest. Ethan lowered his eyes slowly while something painful moved across his face. Regret, shame, grief he had buried beneath money and control for years. Then quietly, almost like the words hurt coming out, he said, "I owe you an apology." Maya blinked once in surprise. Ethan Whitmore stared at the floor instead of at her. "Not because you saved Daniel." His voice roughened slightly. "Not because you stayed when everyone else left." He swallowed hard. "Because I spent months looking directly at you and still never saw you." The storm outside finally began to weaken. And somewhere beneath the sound of fading wind, the mansion no longer felt quite so empty. The rescue crews finally reached the mountain just after sunrise on the third day. The storm had weakened enough for snowplows to carve a narrow path through the buried roads leading toward the Whitmore estate. Red emergency lights flashed faintly across the white landscape outside, while exhausted workers wrapped in blankets slowly stepped onto the cleared driveway one by one. The mansion looked different now beneath the pale winter sun. Smaller somehow, less like a fortress and more like a house that had barely survived being broken open by the storm. Maya stood near the service entrance watching paramedics check Daniel's ankle beside the rescue vehicles below. Cold morning air drifted softly through the partially opened doors, carrying the scent of pine, snow, and melting ice into the hallway. Behind her, workers moved quietly through the estate collecting belongings and preparing to leave. Some glanced toward Maya with grateful smiles before disappearing down the long marble corridors. Others squeezed her hand gently in passing. Nobody treated her like invisible staff anymore. Maya pulled her coat tighter around herself and stared out toward the mountains glowing gold beneath the early sunlight. For the first time in days, the world felt still again. You were planning to leave without saying goodbye. Ethan Whitmore's voice came softly from behind her. Maya turned slowly. He looked healthier than the night before, though exhaustion still shadowed his face. Without the sharpness of anger and control constantly tightening his expression, he appeared older somehow, more honest. He held a small leather folder in one hand. "I did not think you would notice," Maya replied quietly. Ethan gave a faint smile. "I notice you now." The words settled gently between them. No arrogance, no performance, just truth. Snowlight spilled through the windows across the polished floors while distant rescue radios crackled outside. Ethan stepped closer and handed her the leather folder. Maya looked down in confusion before opening it carefully. Inside rested a printed employment contract with her name across the top, but not for housekeeping. Her eyes widened slightly as she read the title beneath it. Director of Residential Operations. Full salary, full benefits, private housing on the estate grounds. Ethan watched her reaction carefully. "The house manager is retiring next month," he explained softly. "And apparently everyone here already listens to you more than they ever listened to me." Maya looked up slowly. "Mr. Whitmore." "Ethan," he corrected gently. She hesitated. The firelight from the west lounge behind them reflected softly across the tired warmth in his eyes. "I spent years building a place where nobody felt safe enough to stay," he admitted quietly. "You walked into it carrying blankets for other people." Maya lowered her gaze toward the contract again. "You do not owe me this." Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, I owe you far more than a job offer." Silence settled between them while snow slid softly from the roof outside in long sparkling sheets beneath the sunlight. Maya looked once more at the mountains stretching endlessly beyond the estate. Then back at Ethan standing there without walls around himself for the first time since she met him. "My mother used to say storms reveal what people are made of," she said softly. Ethan nodded faintly. "Your mother sounds wiser than me." A small laugh escaped Maya before she could stop it. The sound surprised both of them. Simple, warm, human. Ethan smiled then too. Not the polished billionaire smile from magazine covers or investor meetings. Something quieter, real. Outside, the last emergency vehicle began pulling away down the mountain road, while sunlight slowly filled the frozen estate with gold. Maya stepped toward the doorway and looked back once more before leaving the hallway. Ethan still stood there watching her, hands in his coat pockets, no longer looking like a man trapped inside his own mansion. Just a man finally learning how to let somebody stay. And as Maya walked through the bright morning lights spilling across the snow, the house behind her no longer felt cold.
This shell corporation in the Caymans? It's where the money trail ends, and I can prove it.